everybody in the world.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you that even though this is a recorded show, there are still very many ways you can contribute and interact with it outside of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. When this show is live, you can also go to our website, GSMCpodcast.net, where you can do the same things as you can do on YouTube, leaving a tip or donation, or also leaving a question, comment, or concern you may have about the show or any of the shows here across the network. It is greatly appreciated by all, and this makes this show that much better, and all the other shows around the network appreciate it in return as well. But without further ado, let's jump into our College Football Playoff Quarterfinal previews. We are really in the thick of this 12-team field here. We're really going to separate the wheat from the chaff here, and I'm really excited about this game in particular here for our second segment. Even though the 7th seed disparity might seem intimidating, this is a heavyweight matchup, and it's a rematch of an October 12th matchup that might as well have been the best game of the college football regular season. Yes, I'm talking about Ohio State versus Oregon. I talked about the 7-seed disparity. Yes, Ohio State being the 8th seed due to that weirdly heartbreaking loss to Michigan. Oregon, the only undefeated team in the land, taking the 1 seed. And perhaps that Ohio State victory was kind of the turning point in the season for Oregon, because up to that point, Oregon had a couple of shaky outings against one of the teams in the field, Boise State, that they would potentially face in the championship game. That would be a long shot, but it would be a very exciting rematch there as well, and then Idaho obviously in the season. But this game for Oregon in that regular season meeting seemed to be kind of the statement, because they were the newest Big Ten member. They won it their first time around, and they wanted to prove a statement against Ohio State before anything else, and they ultimately did. But to Ohio State's credit here, it could have been a win, but it ultimately came down to one mistake made by a veteran QB who is going to have to step up, much like he did against Tennessee, Will Howard. And looking at this game, I'm going to talk about a couple keys within this game as well as give you the betting perspective here. But ultimately, that's what I think it's going to come down to. Which team can limit the damage done? So without further ado, let's talk about it. Ohio State actually enters as a 2.5-point favorite in a game that in the regular season was decided by 1. So you can see a little bit of the discrepancy here. Still not ultimately budging on Ohio State being the favorite after that a heavy favorite rather, after that impressive win over Tennessee. They're still kind of giving respect to Oregon here as the number 1 seed. But still, Vegas is indicating that this is going to be another tough affair for the Ducks here. The over-under 54.5. Money lines, Ohio State minus 130. Oregon plus 110 here. So as you can see, kind of swinging in the favor of Ohio State here. And I'm not necessarily surprised, but there are a couple of key things that I think we have to diagnose here in determining the outcome of this game, because both of these teams are spectacular and they proved it on October 12th. But ultimately, there are a few little things that I think could separate them on the day. Let's start off, I believe, with Ohio State here. And I think the key to victory is simple. Will Howard cannot have boneheaded mistakes. He needs to stay on schedule, and he needs to ultimately play like he did against Tennessee, because that was his best game as an Ohio State Buckeye. After that loss to Michigan, after week of uncertainty over their playoff positioning, whether or not they would even make the playoffs, they ultimately get in. They face Tennessee in what many people thought would be the most even of those first round matchups, and ultimately blow them out of the water at the Horseshoe in a dominant performance where Will Howard looked completely in rhythm. He looked like the veteran quarterback we know him to be, and he proved that he can just distribute the ball to all these different weapons and ultimately not make mistakes. He was slinging the rock to both Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, even Carnell Tate had a couple of impressive catches in this one. So ultimately, Will Howard proved that he can be competent. But going up against Oregon in this rematch, he's going to have to stay on schedule as long as possible. because Oregon is bringing in a guy who did not play in this game on the defensive side of the football in Jordan Burch. And a lot of good things have been said about Jordan Burch this season, even in his absence here. And then combine that with the emergence of Matayo Uyunglele along this front as well. And you will have a very potent defensive front that can make things very challenging for Will Howard. Because if you bring pressure, chances are that's when Will Howard is at his most vulnerable. And so Will Howard's just going to have to stay in that rhythm he found against Tennessee for as long as possible. Get the ball out quickly, I believe, because if you get the ball out quickly, it keeps this Oregon defensive front on its toes and forces these semi-weak linebackers and secondary, even though they're still a very strong unit, force them to think a little bit more about their decisions. Force Dan Lanning to kind of have to adjust to your game plan rather than adjusting to his. Because if you get behind schedule, Oregon's ready to pounce. And so that's why I think the ultimate key for any Ohio State success in this one, and ultimately an upset victory here, in my opinion, even though they are favored in this matchup, is to limit the mistakes made by the quarterback, Will Howard. And I think he's ultimately capable of it, because I've seen his ascendancy in the Big 12 when he was the Kansas State Wildcats quarterback. I've seen what he can be at his best, but I've also seen the mistakes he makes in critical moments, and I know that those could come back to bite him. But if he ultimately stays out of that territory and keep this Ohio State Buckeyes offense on schedule, then chances are we could be looking at an upset here, because we know what this Ohio State defense can do as well. So it's going to be all about Will Howard on the offensive side of the football, making plays and ultimately making critical decisions that won't hurt his football team. Then we go to the Oregon side of things, because this is a very multifaceted team. We talked a little bit about this Oregon defense and what that defensive front can do for it. Let's talk a little bit about the Oregon offense here and their keys to victory. I do think that one of the special things about Oregon is their understated ground game here. Because when you look at Dillon Gabriel, one of, if not the best college football player statistically of all time. He could break, I believe it's Case Keenum's, I could be incorrect here, all-time passing yards record, and that's an impressive feat for someone who, has been around so many places, UCF, Oklahoma, now at Oregon, trying to win a national championship in his final year of eligibility. But ultimately, what I do like of the balance of Oregon stems from this very understated, like I said, ground game. Because when we think of Oregon, we definitely think about what Dillon Gabriel can do through the air. He can pass effectively in the short to intermediate areas of the field to both Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. But I do think that because of the fact that Oregon's ground game goes a little bit understated, I think one of their keys to victory could be pounding the rock, because you're going to have to neutralize this Ohio State front here, because they have standing depth, especially at the linebacker position where they could go 4 or 5 deep there, and you really, through the air, have to pick and choose your moments, because they have an excellent secondary led by Alabama transfer Caleb Downs as well. So, if you pound the rock early and often with a guy in Jordan James, who might just be the most underrated running back in this entire 12-team field, then you have a good chance of neutralizing this Ohio State defensive front, because this is the number 1 defense in the nation and left in the playoff statistically that you're facing right here. And this is a team that, yes, you got 32 points against a couple of weeks ago, but are coming in with a vengeance right now. They're coming off a high where they really needed that game to get into the right mindset to come into this rematch here and try and make another game of it. Because looking at Ohio State, there are chances that Will Howard might struggle in this game. There are chances where, in critical moments, they might not have the right play on offense. But this Ohio State defense can more than make up for it. And if Oregon plays into their hands a little bit of the time, Dillon Gabriel might be passing the football a little too often, then Ohio State definitely has a chance at an upset, and a blowout one at that, if this Oregon offense can't keep on schedule. So I say, for Oregon, you got to pound the rock with Jordan James. Because if you don't, then there's no rhythm, there's no on-schedule throws that Dillon Gabriel can make, and as a result, you might be playing catch-up a little bit here. So this is all about going up against their strength and trying to attack it at its core, because you can't beat Ohio State without balance. And as much as Dillon Gabriel has been one of those quarterbacks who is so savvy and intelligent and knows the throws he wants to make and knows the throws he might not be able to, I do think that there needs to be a balance and an intention with the way Oregon plays in this one. But now that we talk about the keys to victory, let's talk about ultimately my prediction in this one. It's going to be yet another high-scoring affair, in my opinion, because both of these teams are capable of breaking down the strengths of these opposing defenses. Like I said, Oregon has the run game to keep this offense in balance, and Ohio State has the defense to help compensate for any mistakes this offense might make. And so I do feel like, though, at the end of the day, when I look at Oregon and I look at how multifaceted they can become on the offensive side of the football, where if you do get this run game in rhythm, Dillon Gabriel can pick you apart. He is savvy and intelligent enough to understand the complexities of this Ohio State defense and really attack him at their core, unlike any quarterback really can. And so that's why I have to pick Oregon against the spread here, even though, it's really tempting when you can think about this rematch to pick Ohio State, but I have to pick Oregon here just because, like I said, they can win this game in so many different ways, and I just think that Will Howard might just make a couple more mistakes in this one than we're accustomed to seeing from him. And this is not an indictment of him as a quarterback, it's just something that I've diagnosed in his game that I can't get out of my mind. Because in a critical moment, who's to say that Will Howard will find a way to overcome those decisions? So that's why I have to pick Oregon here, just because their strengths just seem a little bit better than Ohio State's at this point. But coming up next, out of this short break, we diagnose an even more intriguing matchup, the 7-2 Georgia-Notre Dame, and all the storylines that come with it right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube.